I tried calling him again that morning, straight to voicemail. No texts, no read receipts, no posts on his socials. And this wasn't like Tyler. The guy lived online. Even when he had the flu, he'd spam group chats with memes of himself wrapped in tissues like a mummy. The siren had stopped, again, after exactly 13 minutes. I'd checked the timer this time. I sat in my car outside Edgepine, staring toward the forest with my phone in my lap and my chest aching. Aaron hadn't spoken a word since it went off. She just sat by the window in her chair like a wax statue. I finally got up and drove to Tyler's place. His car was in the driveway, door locked. I knocked. No answer. I peered through the front window, spotting his laptop still open on the couch, a glowing blue cursor blinking on a half-written email. I knew his spare key spot, taped under the grill cover on the back porch. My hand trembled as I grabbed it and stepped inside. The house was warm, the air still. Too still. No TV, no music, no Tyler. "Ty," I called. "Hey man, it's me. You good?" Nothing. Then something caught my eye. His laptop, the email. It was addressed to me, drafted but never sent. Ted. Found something really weird in the bunker blueprints. There's a tunnel not listed in the public records, a vertical shaft below Chamber 6C. It's labeled Presley's Keep. Sounds dramatic, right? But the kicker? It's marked as sealed with chain, do not open. I'm heading down to check the site. Old entrance might still be open near Deadman's Creek. Presley's Keep, Deadman's Creek, chains. My blood turned to ice. I left immediately. Deadman's Creek sat on the edge of the forest, about a mile from the old town square. I parked near the trailhead and followed the old dirt path, the woods closing in around me like a mouth. Birds weren't singing. No wind, just my boots crunching leaves and the quiet hum of dread under my ribs. Half an hour in, I spotted it, an old concrete outcrop nestled between gnarled trees and moss-covered boulders. The metal hatch on top was rusted, partially obscured by leaves and vines, but not untouched. The padlock was broken. Fresh scrapes scarred the metal, as if someone had forced it open recently. I swallowed hard and looked around. No sign of Tyler. I pulled the hatch open and descended the ladder, the scent of mildew and something worse hitting me immediately. Stale, old blood and mold. My flashlight flickered across cracked concrete walls and a tunnel stretching forward, the darkness swallowing the beam whole. This wasn't on any modern map. The air got colder the deeper I went. At one point I saw a marking on the wall, a faded stencil of the number 13 circled in red paint. Beneath it someone had scrawled in charcoal, "Do not listen, do not answer." Something about that made my stomach twist. I followed the tunnel for about 200 feet before it opened into a chamber. Dust-coated shelves lined the walls, old boots, helmets, rations, gas masks, forgotten wartime relics, a skeletal cot in one corner, rusty pipes dripping overhead. At the far end, a heavy iron door lay slightly ajar. I took a breath and pushed it open. The room beyond looked wrong. The geometry was subtly off. The angles didn't make sense, corners bent in strange directions. The air shimmered like heat waves rising from the floor despite the cold. At the center of the room, bolted to the wall, was a thick iron door. Black chains crisscrossed its surface, padlocked tight. And across it, in deep gouged letters, Presley's Keep. But there was something else, a notebook, open on the floor, Tyler's handwriting. I rushed over, flipping through the pages, eyes scanning. Voices from behind the door, can't be real. I thought I heard Ted's voice, then my mum's. It's messing with my head. Symbols carved into the walls around the door. Not military, occult. One looks like an eye inside a mouth. Another, a man bound in chains with no face. I'm hearing the siren even down here, but it's inside my head now. I have to go deeper. I think the chain's broken. Something's moving inside. The final entry. If I don't come back, tell Ted I'm sorry. I shouldn't have opened it. The chains on the door groaned. I backed away fast. My flashlight flickered again, and I turned to run, only to freeze. There was something in the corner of the room. It stood motionless. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its mouth hung open, jaw unhinged wider than it should be. Its eyes were pits of black, and its body was draped in what looked like pieces of old warden uniforms. My blood went ice cold. I didn't look back. I ran, stumbling through the tunnel, heart punching my ribs, not stopping until daylight hit my face again. I slammed the hatch shut and rolled a log over it. When I got back to the car, I vomited in the dirt. Tyler was gone, but whatever he found, it wasn't. That night, I showed Aaron the notebook. She didn't even blink, just ran her fingers over the scrawled pages like she was reading braille carved into bone. "You should have stayed away," she said softly. "What is this place?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, Presley believed he was chosen, that the war was just the beginning. He thought there was a power sleeping below us, one he could use, but when he tried to control it, she went quiet again. "He didn't open the door," she whispered. "He became it." The human mind has limits. I learned that the night I saw the thing in the keep, the thing draped in scraps of an old uniform, standing where Tyler must have stood just hours before he vanished. You can only rationalize so much before your brain gives up trying. It folds, like cheap paper, and my mind was fraying. I didn't sleep that night, not even a little. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face, or lack of one. That wide, howling mouth, those eyes that didn't reflect light, just swallowed it. The siren hadn't sounded again, but it didn't need to. It was in my ears now, a phantom wail that droned beneath every thought. I kept thinking about Tyler's notebook, the symbols, the voices, the mention of Presley's keep. When I returned to Edgepine the next morning, Aaron was waiting. Not in her bed, but in the hallway, fully dressed in clothes I hadn't seen her wear since I was a kid. Brown boots, a button-up coat with brass buttons, and her old World War II Red Cross pin. She was staring out a hallway window toward the woods. She looked ready. "Grandma?" I asked. "Are you okay?" She turned slowly, and for the first time since the siren began, she smiled. But there was no joy in it, just a brittle calm. "You went into the keep," she said. I froze. "I didn't tell you where it was." "You didn't have to." She nodded once. Then it started again. We sat in her room, the curtains drawn. The TV was off and the air felt too quiet. It was the kind of silence that meant something bigger was listening. Aaron didn't waste time. "When the bombs began falling in 1941, we were told to stay below for safety," she said. "But Presley made that safety into a prison. He built more than shelter. He built dominion." "You said he thought he was chosen." Aaron nodded. "He believed the world was ending, not just from war, but something older. He read from a book he never let anyone see. His journal, he claimed. But it wasn't his. The pages were ancient, sewn with leather that didn't look like any animal I knew." She paused. "I was only 15. I thought he was a savior, charismatic, powerful. I didn't understand what he really was doing until it was too late." "What was he doing?" I asked. Her eyes locked on mine. "Feeding it." A chill slid down my spine. "Feeding what?" "There's something beneath this town," she whispered. "Not a man, not a god. Something waiting. Presley found it. Or maybe it found him. He started making us chant during the siren, told us it was to ward off the fear. But it wasn't. What was it? He was inviting it in, piece by piece." She stood and walked to a drawer, pulling out a bundle of old documents, faded, crumbling with age. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the original shelter system. It was far bigger than anything in the public records. Dozens of chambers. Hidden tunnels. At the bottom, circled in red, was the keep. Next to it was a symbol, one I recognized from Tyler's notebook. A man, faceless, chained at the wrists, kneeling before a mouth carved in stone. "That's what he called it," she said. "The mouth beneath." She pointed to Chamber 6C. "That's where the massacre began." My throat tightened. "What happened down there?" Aaron closed her eyes. "We tried to stop him. After he framed 2 volunteers for sabotage, after he had them hanged in front of all of us, I realized who he really was. I warned others. We started a revolt, and for a moment, we won. We beat him to death in front of the doors to the keep. But when we opened them, Her voice cracked. It wasn't empty. I waited. A shadow came out, not a person, not a ghost. It looked like Presley, but taller, wrong, with limbs that stretched like rope. It touched the first man and his skull folded in on itself like crumpled paper. She was crying now. It killed almost 1,000 people in the space of an hour. No fire, no blood, just silence afterward. I felt cold, like the temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees. But you survived, she nodded. It let me go. I don't know why. I never have. I left Edgepine in a daze. I sat in my car and just stared at the steering wheel for 10 minutes, trying to understand what any of this was. It sounded impossible, like she'd read a Lovecraft novel and hallucinated the rest. But I'd seen the figure in the keep. I'd seen Tyler's notes, and now I had this map. Something did happen down there, and it wasn't a hallucination. That night I scanned the map, trying to find a new way into the lower tunnels. If Chamber 6C still existed, maybe Tyler had gone there. Maybe he wasn't gone, just stuck, injured. I needed to know. I went back. I packed food, water, a crowbar, and a handheld GPS. I told no one, not even Aaron. I found the hatch at Dead Man's Creek again. The log was still rolled over it, but the vines had shifted. Something had touched it since I was there last. I climbed down and moved fast, retracing my path through the tunnels until I reached the branching hallways shown on the map. This time I turned away from the keep. Towards 6C, the air felt wrong, not cold, not hot. Wrong. Like breathing in silence that didn't want to be disturbed. I passed rooms full of rusted cots, crates of moldy supplies, and once, chillingly, a nursery. Empty cribs lined the walls, their blankets untouched for 80 years. And then I found it. Chamber 6C. The door had been torn open, metal peeled back like it had been ripped by claws. Inside, the walls were covered in more symbols, fresh, carved recently. And in the center of the room, a chair, Tyler's jacket draped over it. But no Tyler, just a single word, scratched into the floor over and over and over, hundreds of times, until the stone itself had worn away. Listen, 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 listen. That's when I heard the siren again. But this time, it was inside the bunker. The siren didn't come from above. It wasn't distant, distorted, or filtered through rusted pipes like before. This time it came from inside the concrete, not through the walls. From them. The stone itself seemed to vibrate with that shrieking tone, as if the bunker had become a throat. And somehow I knew. It wasn't sounding for a raid, it was sounding for me. I staggered backward from the chair where Tyler's jacket hung, the word "listen" echoing in my head like a command. My flashlight began flickering again, just like it had in the keep. I smacked it against my palm, it steadied. For now. Then the whispering started, faint, like voices from underwater. From the corners of the room. From the air itself. They slithered through the siren's wail, hissing fragments of sentences I couldn't fully understand. He opened the door. Chains break, not mend. The mouth feeds on regret. Where is the boy who brought the key? The light hit something on the far wall. It was a mirror. No, at least it looked like a mirror. But the glass was rippled, like it had melted in a fire and never quite hardened. Carved into the frame were more of those symbols Tyler had written about. The eye in the mouth. The man with no face. A spiral that somehow seemed to rotate when I wasn't directly looking at it. I should have turned back, but I stepped closer. In the warped reflection, I didn't see myself. Not completely. My body was there, but my face was gone. Not missing, just blank, like a sheet of skin stretched over emptiness. And behind me, something moved. I spun around. Nothing there, just cold stone, the empty chair, and those scratched-in words. Listen, listen, listen. The siren stopped, just like that. One breath it was screaming, the next. Silence, but the voices didn't stop. They grew louder, faster, overlapping, demanding. Listen! And that's when the stone beneath the chair cracked. A jagged line split open in the floor with a sound like snapping bone. The chair toppled into it, followed by the jacket. I lunged, grabbing the fabric, Tyler's jacket, and barely pulled it back before the floor widened into a gaping fissure. A smell hit me. Rotting copper and old fire, the scent of things that should never have lived. I held the jacket to my chest and backed out of the chamber as the voices screamed louder and louder. Then, from inside the fissure, I heard Tyler's voice. "Ted." It was weak, distant, but real. "Help. Me." I froze. "Tyler?" Silence. Then again, quieter, fading like a dream. "Don't. Listen." And then nothing but the sound of the stone shifting. The crack sealed itself like skin healing over a wound. Gone. When I climbed out of the bunker, the world felt wrong. The forest was still there. My car, the sun setting behind the ridge. But I wasn't the same person who had entered. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping Tyler's jacket, and I wept. Something down there had taken him, or used him, or become him. And it wanted more. And I had listened. That night, I returned to Edgepine. Aaron was waiting at the window again. She didn't ask me what I'd found. She already knew. She just opened her drawer and pulled out something wrapped in an old cloth. It was a book. Worn leather, yellowed pages, symbols etched in iron along the spine. My skin crawled at the sight of it. "I never wanted you to see this," she said, "but you went down there. You've been marked. It knows you now. You have to understand what you're dealing with." She opened the book to a page with a crude illustration. A black figure standing atop a staircase of chained bodies, mouth wide open as people below raised their hands in worship or terror. Above it, a word scrawled in another language, something angular, ancient. "What is that?" I asked. "Kaltura," Aaron whispered. "The thing beneath, the eater of regret." I stared at her. She continued flipping pages. "Presley found this buried in the foundation of the original church. It predates the town, predates the war. It talks about a force that feeds on guilt, on shame." On silence, I remembered the word carved over and over in Chamber 6C. "Listen." "It speaks through echoes," she said, "through memory. It becomes what you lost. It took Presley. Then it used him like a mask. It'll do the same to anyone who listens too long." My breath caught. "It used Tyler." Aaron's face fell. "Yes." We sat in silence for a long time, the book open on her lap, the air heavy with the weight of everything I'd seen. Then I asked the question I'd been dreading. Why was I spared? She didn't answer for a long time. Then, "Because we're the same." "What do you mean?" I told it something once, something I should have kept to myself. That's why it let me go. Because I helped it. And maybe by going back into the bunker, maybe you helped it too. I looked at the jacket in my hands, the cracked stone, the voices. Tyler's whisper, "Don't listen." I had listened, and now, it wasn't just watching me, it was waiting. That night I dreamed of the chamber, but it wasn't empty this time. I stood in front of the mirror again, but my reflection wasn't blank anymore. It wore Tyler's face, and it was smiling. The night was still. I hadn't heard the siren again, but its presence clung to me like a second skin. The silence in my apartment felt wrong. The faint hum of streetlights outside only amplified the buzzing in my ears, the throb that matched the beat of my heart. It wasn't a sound I could shake, not after what I'd seen in the bunker. Aaron had given me no answers, only cryptic warnings and books filled with strange symbols. I couldn't help but feel I was walking into something far darker than I could handle. And yet, there I was, standing on the threshold of something ancient, knowing I could never turn back. I couldn't let it consume me. The next morning, I returned to Aaron's place. The world felt heavier, like the gravity had shifted overnight. The air was thick, and the birds that usually flitted through her backyard were gone. I knocked, and she answered the door, her face grim but resigned. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She led me inside, to the same table we had sat at before. The same folder of records lay on the table, the same frayed edges of old paper peeking out from between the covers. This time, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Presley didn't just build a bunker, Ted," she said, voice steady. "He built a sanctuary, one that would let him keep his secrets safe, a place where he could hide from the war and from the truth. He became the war in a way, but it wasn't just about protecting people from bombs. It was about something else, something much older. "What are you talking about?" I asked. She handed me a thick, worn journal, its pages filled with spidery handwriting and detailed sketches. Presley was obsessed with the occult. He found a book in the foundation of the original church. It wasn't a religious book, more like a ritual book. It spoke of entities that lived beneath the earth in the dark spaces between worlds. These entities, whatever they were, could be summoned through sound, through ritual. Presley thought the siren wasn't just a warning, it was a calling. Calling for what? I asked, feeling the blood drain from my face. I'd suspected this, but hearing it confirmed was worse than I imagined. Presley believed the siren opened a gateway, a way to communicate with something far older than the war. But the more he tried, the deeper he went. And the deeper he went, the more it took. I flipped through the journal. The first entries were written with clear, rational thought, filled with descriptions of air raid drills, rationing, and troop movements. But as the months passed, the entries began to change. The handwriting grew more erratic. The ink smeared as if pressed hard onto the paper. And the drawings became stranger, faces twisted in agony, eyes with too many pupils, symbols that seemed to ripple across the page. One entry stood out. "I heard it again tonight." The voice came with the siren, clearer than ever before. "It promises to make me eternal. It speaks of the mouth beneath the town, the place where the walls bend and time stretches. It calls to me. I must obey." Another entry from later that year. "The Silent Screams, the channel of interesting horror stories. If you are new on this channel, then don't forget to subscribe The Silent Screams and press the bell icon for interesting stories. Before we move on, please donate me in the form of subscribe." "But the people in the bunker," I said, "the ones who died, the ones who disappeared. What happened to them?" Aaron's eyes darkened and she pressed her palms against the table as if steadying herself. "They weren't killed by bombs, Ted, or by gas. They died because the siren had them. The mouth beneath took them. Presley opened the door, and the things that came through, they were feeding on the people inside. The siren wasn't a warning, it was a sacrifice." She pushed the journal toward me. "You need to understand. Presley wasn't trying to save people. He thought he was protecting them. But in reality, he was feeding them to the darkness beneath." The weight of the truth pressed down on me, crushing all my thoughts into a singular, terrifying question. What happened to Tyler? I was already heading to the door before I'd even fully processed the thought. Aaron didn't stop me. She didn't even say anything. I could feel her eyes on me, the heaviness of her unspoken words wrapping around me like a chain. I drove back to the bunker without a clear plan. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Some part of me still hoped it was all a lie, some tragic tale spun out of fear. But the deeper I drove into the woods, the heavier the air became. The sky was overcast, a thick blanket that choked the sunlight. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being pulled somewhere. I couldn't resist. When I reached the entrance, I didn't even hesitate. The hatch was locked, just as it had been before, but I'd learned how to bypass the rusted mechanisms. I stepped inside, and the oppressive silence of the bunker immediately pressed in on me. I headed back to where I had found the mirror, the reflection that had shown me Tyler's face, twisted and empty. The hallway seemed to stretch forever, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the stone. Then I heard it. The siren. But this time it wasn't distant. It wasn't coming from above. It was inside the walls. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, as if they had become an extension of the siren's call. The sound twisted and contorted, pushing at my chest, pulling at my soul. I couldn't breathe. I ran, down the dark corridors, past the chamber that had swallowed Tyler's voice, and into the chamber where the warden's rituals had been performed. The room was different. Something had changed. The gramophone sat at the center, its horn facing me like an open mouth. The records were spinning again, but this time they played something new. Not the siren, it was a chant, low, rhythmic, and hypnotic. We listen, we listen, we listen. And standing beside the gramophone was Tyler. or what was left of him. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, eyes sunken and dark, but the smile, that was unmistakable. He stepped toward me, slow and deliberate. His voice was no longer his own. It was layered with others, whispers blending into one. "You shouldn't have come back." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The siren roared inside my skull, and in that moment, I realized I was hearing something worse than the siren. I was hearing the truth. The world collapsed around me as Tyler stepped forward, his eyes dark, hollow pits of nothingness, his mouth stretched into a grin that didn't belong to him, didn't belong to anything human. "You shouldn't have come back," he repeated, but his voice was layered with countless others, too many to count. It was a chorus, a cacophony of whispers, of voices I'd never heard before, speaking from a place deeper than this world. I tried to speak, but the air in my lungs had turned to stone. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The only thing that existed was the sound of the siren, louder now, deafening. It pulsed through the walls, through the floor, through my bones. Tyler, or whatever he had become, was still smiling, inching closer, his feet dragging through the dust. His eyes were open, but I knew he couldn't see me. He was blind to everything except the thing that had claimed him. "Don't you remember?" he asked, his voice twisting and bending like a broken record. "I told you to listen." We all listened. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking, but the room seemed to stretch before me. The walls narrowed, the space constricted, and the air grew heavier, thicker, like I was drowning. The siren, it was coming from inside me. I couldn't take it. I needed to get out. I had to get out. But my feet wouldn't move. My legs were paralyzed by the pressure of the sound, the weight of the words, and the knowledge that I had opened the door. I tried to scream, but the air was thick with the stench of decay, of things long buried. The odor wasn't just the mildew of the bunker, it was something else, something that smelled of death and despair. I could feel it crawling across my skin, whispering in my ear, beckoning me closer. "You hear it, don't you?" Tyler's voice said, but his smile never wavered. "You've always heard it. The mouth beneath, it calls for you, just as it called for me. We've all heard it, every single one of us. That's why we're here." I was gasping now, fighting for control, fighting against the suffocating sensation that filled my chest. The walls seemed to close in on me, pressing against my ribs, but I couldn't stop myself from looking at him. I had to know. "What happened to you?" I choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. Tyler's smile grew wider, and he tilted his head to one side, as if considering the question. His eyes, those hollow, vacant eyes, looked right through me. "We are nothing now," he said, his voice shifting into a whisper. "The siren takes everything from you, Ted. Everything that made you real. The mouth beneath doesn't care about who you were. It only cares about what it can feed on. And it's been feeding for years." I wanted to run, to scream, to break free from this nightmare, but my body wouldn't obey. The siren's call was too strong, it had burrowed too deep into me. I could hear it even inside my mind now, pulsing with each beat of my heart. "Tyler," I managed to say, but the word was strangled by the pressure in my throat. "Please, what happened to the others? The people in the bunker? What happened to Presley?" At the mention of Presley's name, Tyler's grin faltered for the first time. His eyes darkened, like something ancient and terrible had stirred inside him. He let out a low, guttural laugh, a sound that was far from human. "Presley," he rasped. "You think Presley was the one in charge?" Number Presley was nothing but a puppet for the mouth beneath. The siren wailed louder, its sound growing more distorted. It was no longer a warning. It was a command. "The siren is his voice now," Tyler continued, his tone shifting, growing darker, more alien. "He didn't just bring the war underground, he brought them. And they have been waiting for someone to open the door." Suddenly the walls began to tremble. The ground beneath my feet cracked, the sound of splintering stone reverberating through the chamber. I could feel the vibrations in my teeth, in my skull. The ceiling above me groaned, as if something massive was shifting within the earth. Tyler didn't move. He just stood there, smiling that unnatural grin, his eyes never leaving me. And then I saw it. A figure, tall, black as pitch, with arms that stretched far too long, slithered from the shadows at the far end of the room. It moved without sound, its shape unnatural, like something that shouldn't exist in this world. Its presence sucked the air out of the room, replaced by a sickly warmth that made my skin crawl. The figure stepped forward, its face featureless, a void of blackness. And from that blackness, I heard a voice so ancient, so deep, that it made my heart skip a beat. "You have opened the door." The siren echoed the words, distorting them, repeating them over and over. I could hear it, feel it, deep in my bones. Tyler's voice joined the chorus. "You should have never come back. You should have stayed away. You have unleashed something you can never put back." I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer weight of what was happening. The thing before me moved closer, its long, twisted arms stretching toward me like tendrils of smoke, wrapping around the very air I breathed. The figure leaned down, its presence filling my vision, and I saw it, the hollow pit where its face should have been, where its eyes should have been. A gaping void. "It's your turn now." The voice was not just in my ears, it was inside my mind, inside my thoughts. I could feel the words digging into my consciousness, pressing down on my very soul. I screamed. I tried to break free, to run, but my legs didn't respond. I was rooted to the spot, the siren's call reverberating in my skull like 1,000 voices, all screaming at once. And then, as if responding to my scream, something in the air shifted. The floor beneath me cracked wide open, and in that moment I felt myself falling. The world tipped sideways, and before I could even process what was happening, the floor beneath me cracked open. My stomach lurched as the ground gave way, and I was falling into darkness. For what felt like an eternity, I plummeted. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, like I was drowning in a pool of tar, and the walls of the cavern around me seemed to stretch and distort in impossible angles. The siren's wail filled my head, but now it was different. It no longer sounded like a simple mechanical howl, it was alive, it was sentient. Every beat of the siren was like a pulse in the heart of something ancient, something that had been buried long before the bunker had ever been built, something that had waited for someone like me to come along, to open the door, to awaken it. The darkness around me became oppressive, thickening like smoke. I could feel it pressing in on me from all sides, the weight of it bearing down as I fell. My hands shot out instinctively, but there was nothing to grab onto, nothing to break my fall. It was as though the ground had ceased to exist, as though I was falling through a rift between worlds. And then, as suddenly as it began, the falling stopped. My feet hit solid ground with a sickening thud, and the impact rattled through my bones. I gasped, breathless and disoriented, and looked around. I had fallen into a vast chamber, larger than any underground facility I had ever seen. The walls were impossibly smooth, like polished stone, stretching high above me until they disappeared into the shadows. There was no ceiling, no floor. It was an abyss, an endless void stretching into nothingness. And there, at the center of the cavern, was a massive gaping maw. The siren had gone silent, but its presence still throbbed in the air. The cavern seemed to pulse in rhythm with it, as if the very space I was standing in was alive, breathing. I took a hesitant step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The walls, the air, the ground. Everything felt wrong. The shadows moved like liquid, shifting and swirling as if something was lurking within them. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Behind me, I heard the echo of footsteps. I spun around, but there was nothing there, only the impenetrable blackness of the cavern. And then the whispering began. It was soft at first, a faint rustling sound that seemed to come from every direction. It was a language I didn't understand, a slow, guttural chant that sent chills down my spine. The words twisted in the air, curling around me like smoke. Then I heard a voice. It wasn't Tyler's voice, but it carried the same deep, unnerving resonance. It came from the very air, from the depths of the cavern itself. "You have come. You have opened the door." The words reverberated in my skull, shaking me to my core. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The very air was thick with an ancient power, one that was beyond anything I could comprehend. The shadows around me seemed to shift, coiling like serpents, their forms becoming more defined, more tangible. They stretched and twitched, and I could feel them closing in on me. Then something else stepped into view. It was Tyler, or at least what was left of him. His body was no longer the boy I had known. His skin was stretched too tight over his bones, his eyes wide and empty, the whites of his irises bleeding into the pupils. His body jerked unnaturally, like a puppet on strings, and I could see the darkness inside him, the same darkness that had consumed everything in this place. Tyler's smile twisted in a way that no human smile should. His lips cracked open, revealing blackened teeth that were far too sharp, too many. He moved toward me, dragging his feet, but his gaze never left me. "You should have stayed away," he whispered, his voice fractured. "It's already too late." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice lost in the churning, echoing whispers that surrounded me. Every word they spoke seemed to pierce through my thoughts, filling my mind with images, visions of people in the bunker, of their faces contorted in agony as they were consumed by the darkness. I could see them now, their bodies twisted and distorted as if they had been crushed from the inside out. Faces caved in, skin peeling away like rotting fruit, all while the siren wailed in the distance, urging them to remain still. Tyler's voice cut through the vision. They didn't understand. None of them did. Presley didn't just bring us here to hide from the war, he brought us here to be part of something much, much darker. He sacrificed us to it. I shook my head, trying to push the images away. I couldn't let it consume me. Not now, not when I was so close to the truth. "Why did you bring me here?" I managed to croak. "What is this place?" Tyler's smile deepened, though his eyes remained hollow. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't just a bunker, Ted. It's the gateway. The siren is its key, and we—" He gestured to the darkness around us, to the shadows that now seemed to breathe on their own. "Are the guardians. We were chosen." I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. I looked around desperately, trying to find an escape, but the darkness was suffocating. There was no way out. "Chosen for what?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "For the hunger." The word echoed, repeating itself over and over in the cavern until it became all I could hear. The shadows began to stir again, moving toward me, reaching out with long, dark tendrils that curled through the air like smoke. And I could see it now, a dark shape at the center of the room, a presence so ancient, so horrible, that it filled the entire cavern with its cold, insatiable void. It was watching me, and it was hungry. The air in the cavern had become suffocating, thick with an oppressive heat that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I could feel it pressing down on me, crawling along my skin, suffusing my lungs. The darkness was no longer just an absence of light. It was alive, and it was closing in around me. I backed away from Tyler, my breath shallow and ragged. The shadows twitched and shifted as if they had their own life, their own will. My eyes darted around, trying to find something, anything, solid in the swirling blackness. But there was nothing. Nothing but the vast, empty expanse of the cavern and the crawling, twisting thing that had taken root inside of it. And then I saw it. The dark shape at the center of the room, the presence I had felt watching me, was finally becoming clear. At first, I thought it was just the shadows, distorted. But as my vision focused, I realized it was something far worse. It wasn't a figure. It was a mass. A writhing, undulating mass of tendrils and smoke, its edges constantly shifting, like something that had been ripped out of reality itself. There was no true shape to it, no definite form, just an endless, monstrous collection of darkness and malice. It was a thing beyond comprehension, and yet it was undeniably real. I felt it pulling at me, its presence like an invisible hand dragging me closer. The air became colder, sharper, as though every breath I took was slowly draining the warmth from my body. My legs felt like they were made of lead, each step forward a battle against my own terror. But despite my every instinct screaming at me to run, I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot. The figure, Tyler, was still standing there, his body twitching in unnatural jerks, but his eyes, those wide, empty eyes, were locked onto the mass. It was like he was waiting for something. "What is it?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible. Tyler didn't answer at first. He simply stared at the mass with that same twisted, hungry grin. His lips peeled back to reveal teeth too sharp, too numerous. "It's the hunger," he said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. "The thing beneath the world. The mouth that devours everything. It's been here longer than the bunker. Longer than Presley, longer than the war. It feeds on us." I felt a shudder pass through my spine. The words made no sense, and yet something about them felt true. This wasn't just some twisted experiment gone wrong. This was something ancient, something that had been waiting in the shadows, watching for the right moment to emerge. The whispers returned, louder now, swirling in my ears. They were the same guttural voices I had heard before, but now they seemed to come from all directions, from within the very walls of the cavern, from the mass at the center of the room. I couldn't make out the words, but they were urgent, filled with a desperate hunger. The mass shifted again, and something moved within it, a glimpse of something alive, something that wasn't human. I couldn't see it clearly, but it was there, a form that twisted and writhed, far beyond any creature I had ever seen. Tyler's eyes were glowing now, the whites of his irises replaced with a sickly greenish hue. His smile spread wider. "It's starving, Ted, and it wants you. You're the last one it needs to consume, the last one to open the door." The words felt like a physical blow. The last one. What did he mean? My mind raced, trying to process the madness of the situation, but it was all slipping through my fingers like sand. I had opened the door. I had brought this upon myself. This was the nightmare that had been waiting all along, lurking in the darkness beneath the earth. "No," I gasped, shaking my head, my body trembling with fear. "No, I didn't." But Tyler didn't hear me. His mouth was moving, but the words weren't for me. They were for the thing at the center of the cavern. The mass seemed to respond, a low, guttural sound vibrating through the walls. The ground beneath me trembled, and I could feel it deep in my bones, the hunger, the need for something, someone. And then, as if obeying some invisible command, the mass began to shift and move. I watched in horror as the black tendrils, once swirling idly in the darkness, began to extend, creeping toward me like a swarm of serpents. They were slow at first, but then they quickened, their movements jerky, predatory. The shadows seemed to stretch, pulling at the edges of my vision, the cavern narrowing, closing in. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with their dissonant rhythm. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, could feel the blood pumping faster, faster, as the tendrils reached out for me, their tips glistening with a wet, slick sheen. Tyler stepped back, his eyes never leaving me. His lips parted, but there was no more humor, no more twisted smile. There was only a sick, desperate hunger in his expression, an understanding that he had already succumbed to the mass. "Don't fight it," he said quietly, almost soothingly. "It's already too late." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. The darkness was pulling me in, tugging at my mind, at my very soul. The tendrils reached out, one brushing my cheek, cold as ice, and I screamed. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. There was no escape, no running, no fighting. The hunger had already begun. It had already begun with Tyler. It had begun with everyone who had ever come into this place. It had begun when Presley had opened the bunker and unwittingly unleashed whatever dark force had been waiting beneath. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I did, I felt something shift. It wasn't just the air, it was something inside me, something deep in my gut, like a switch had been flipped. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew that I was no longer just a victim. I was part of this. I was tied to it. And in the distance, I heard it again. The siren. It was calling me. The siren wailed again, its shrill tones slicing through the cavern with a force that made my teeth ache. The sound, familiar and terrifying, rattled through my skull. It was the same sound that had haunted the town years ago, the same sound that had driven Aaron and everyone else into the depths of the bunker. But now, it wasn't just a call to safety. It was a summons to something worse. I could feel the mass shifting, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. The tendrils that had reached for me recoiled, as if they too were responding to the siren. The shadows in the cavern stretched longer, writhed tighter. The air thickened, as if the very space was bending around the sound. I wasn't just hearing the siren anymore, I felt it. The reverberations buzzed through my bones, rattling my chest, tightening my throat. It was like the sound was coming from inside me, calling to something deep within. I tried to move, to take a step, but my body felt heavy, as though the very air had become dense, thick with unseen pressure. I turned to look at Tyler, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. His gaze was fixed on the dark mass in the center of the room. His expression was no longer twisted with hunger. It was calm, almost serene. It was as if he was in a trance, waiting for something to happen. "Tyler," I shouted, my voice hoarse. I reached out, but it felt as though the words were swallowed by the darkness. "Tyler, what's happening? What is this place?" But he didn't respond. The siren continued to scream in the background, its wail rising and falling in pitch, its cry more urgent than ever. I felt something shifting beneath my feet, as if the very ground itself was beginning to buckle and tremble. The shadows stretched further, twisting into sharp angles, and I could feel the weight of them pressing in on me. And then, as though from nowhere, a voice broke through the static in my head. It wasn't Tyler's voice, and it wasn't the eerie whispers I had been hearing. This voice was clear, powerful. "You have opened the door." The words echoed through the cavern, reverberating in the walls, the air, my very mind. It was a voice that seemed to come from every direction at once. It was deep, too deep, like it was reaching up from the core of the earth itself. The mass before me trembled. The tendrils reached out again, but this time they didn't come for me. They shot toward the walls, the floor, the ceiling, as if seeking something. Some kind of sustenance. And then the truth hit me. This was no bunker. This place was the heart of it all. The bunker had been nothing more than a cover, a thin veil to protect those who had wandered in, trapped, like rats in a maze. This had never been about shelter. It had been about feeding the thing that lay beneath. I looked back at Tyler, his body unmoving, his eyes wide and empty. I could see the darkness, the void, pulling at him like a magnet. He wasn't even human anymore. He was a vessel, a puppet. His body had been claimed, consumed by whatever was behind the siren's call. The voice spoke again, its tone low, almost melancholic. "The hunger is insatiable. It will never be satisfied." I shook my head. "Number, this isn't real. It can't be real." But I knew it was. Everything, the siren, the shadows, the whispers, was real. The thing was real. The hunger was real. And it was coming for me. I stumbled backward, my legs failing beneath me. My mind raced, but it was like I was moving through quicksand, each thought a moment too late. I needed to get out. I needed to find a way to escape. But there was no escape. There had never been one. I had been brought here for a reason, just like everyone else. I was another pawn, another offering to whatever had waited below the earth for so long. As I continued to back away, I felt something strange in the air. A pressure, a shifting. Like something was opening in the darkness. The mass quivered again, and I saw it then. It was not a singular entity, but countless forms, shifting and slithering beneath the surface. The walls rippled with their movement, and I could see shapes. Eyes, too many eyes, blinking in the dark. They weren't human eyes, but something other, something that existed beyond reason. And then I heard it. A voice that wasn't the voice in my head. A voice that came from behind me, from the depths of the cavern. It was a faint whisper at first, but it grew louder, clearer. "Come closer." I whipped around, but there was no one there. Just the blackness, stretching further and further, a yawning chasm that seemed to be pulling me in. I stumbled, nearly falling to the ground as the pressure increased, as the shadows moved toward me, enveloping me. I could feel it. The hunger was near. It was in the air, in the shadows, in the walls. It was everywhere, and it was waiting. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The siren's call had latched onto my soul, pulling me closer. And I understood now what it wanted. It wasn't after me, it was after my soul, after the essence of who I was. The shadows, the hunger, the mass, it wanted to consume everything. Everyone. I had been warned, Aaron had tried to tell me. But I had ignored her. I had thought I could handle it. I couldn't. The whispers grew louder. The darkness pressed closer. And then Tyler's voice broke through, not human, but filled with an unnatural calm. "It's time, Ted." I reached out for him, desperate to find something to hold on to, but he was too far away. And in his place, the shadows began to take shape, their forms folding in on themselves like a twisted, impossible puzzle. "It's time." And with those words, the darkness closed in. I couldn't move. The shadows were closing in, wrapping around me like a suffocating cloak. Every inch of the cavern was alive with dark energy, the mass at its center pulsating in sync with the siren's call. The whispers, once distant and vague, now filled my ears with a deafening cacophony. They were not just voices, they were thoughts, memories, screams. They came from everywhere, from the very ground beneath me, from the walls that seemed to breathe, from the thing that lay waiting in the depths. I could feel the cold tendrils brushing against my skin, their icy touch creeping up my arms, curling around my neck. The air grew thicker, heavy with the weight of something ancient and hungry. My breath was shallow, my heart pounding in my chest, as though it was trying to escape the confines of my ribs. And then Tyler's voice broke through the chaos again, soft, almost a murmur, as if he was speaking from a far-off place, a place beyond time. "It's already too late." I turned toward him, but his eyes, those empty, glazed eyes, told me there was nothing left of the person I once knew. He had already succumbed to the thing that had claimed him. His body was a shell, a puppet to whatever force had taken control. And I realized, with a sudden chilling clarity, that I wasn't facing a man anymore. I was facing the hunger itself, wearing his skin as a mask. The mass in the center of the cavern shifted again. The black tendrils writhed like serpents, each one reaching out, seeking something to latch onto. And as I watched, the mass began to stretch, expanding outward, filling the entire space with its grotesque form. It was not one thing, but many, a collection of countless shapes and faces, all trapped in some twisted, undying dance. Some of the faces were familiar, others were unfamiliar, but their eyes were the same, empty, hollow, void of life, yet full of a terrible, knowing hunger. I realized then that this wasn't just a place of death. It was a place of consumption. The bunker had been built over a hole, a wound in the earth that had festered for decades. What Presley had uncovered was not just a shelter for the living. It had been a feeding ground for something ancient, something inhuman. The shadows around me pressed closer, suffocating as if they were trying to drag me down into the abyss. The siren's wail grew louder, its piercing tone ringing in my ears like a funeral bell, each echo a reminder of the lives lost in the darkness below. And then the voices started to speak again, clearer this time, as though they were reaching out to me directly, their whispers like cold fingers on my skin. "You're not alone, Ted. We've always been here." I turned, searching frantically for the source of the words, but there was nothing. No one. Just the mass, its tendrils stretching wider, its form shifting, ever-changing. The voice continued, its tone almost soothing. "We've waited for you. We've waited for someone to unlock the door." I stumbled back, my feet slipping on the slick, uneven ground. The hunger in the air was palpable, thick enough to taste, to choke on. I could feel it crawling under my skin, burrowing into my chest, squeezing the breath from me. The mass continued to grow, spreading like ink through water, each tendril that reached out, leaving behind a trail of decay, as though it were consuming everything in its path, pulling it into the void. This is what happens when the door is opened. We feast, we take what is ours. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like a needle driven deep into my heart. I gasped, clutching at my chest, but the pain didn't stop. It spread, growing stronger with each passing second, until it felt like my very soul was being torn apart. My breath caught in my throat as the darkness swallowed me whole, the pressure in the air pushing me to my knees. "Please, please," I whispered, unable to speak louder. "I don't want this. I didn't mean to." But the voice in my head was unrelenting. It was no longer just a voice. It was a presence, a force that was wrapping itself around my mind, pulling my thoughts into the void. "There is no escape, Ted. You are already part of us. We have been waiting for so long. The hunger is endless, and you are just one more offering." I screamed, my body writhing in agony, but no sound came. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, pulling me deeper into the mass, pulling me into it. And then I understood. I wasn't meant to escape. None of us were. We were all meant to feed. This had been the plan all along. Presley, Aaron, the others. They were all part of the same sacrifice, drawn into the bunker, into the darkness. The siren had never been a warning. It had been a call to bring us to the end. My vision blurred as the shadows crept up my legs, winding their way around my body. I could feel the cold tendrils tightening, binding me, as though the very darkness was eating me alive. The hunger was inside me now, gnawing at my very being. I could feel it in my mind, in my soul. But then, through the haze of pain and terror, something changed. A flicker of light, a small but distinct spark, burned within me. I wasn't going to let this consume me, not like this. With the last of my strength, I reached out. Not toward the shadows, but toward something else, something far stronger. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it, buried beneath the fear, buried beneath the hunger. It was the truth. I had come too far to just fade away. I refuse. I whispered the words again, more firmly this time. I could feel them, the presence of the others, their whispered pleas, their endless suffering, but I wasn't going to be their last meal. Not today. The mass around me quivered, its tendrils retracting for a moment. And then I heard it again. The voice clear and resounding, "You cannot fight us." But I wasn't alone anymore. There was something stronger now, something that rose from the very depths of my soul, the hunger, the darkness. They may have thought they had won, but they hadn't accounted for one thing. I wasn't just a victim. I was the key. The darkness recoiled from me, as if it feared what was beginning to rise within me. The mass before me trembled, its shifting form pausing for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to gather what remained of my strength. The weight pressing against my chest seemed to lessen, like the very fabric of the darkness was hesitating, unsure of what was happening. I could feel it. A pulse, a thrum of energy beneath the surface, far older than anything I could comprehend. It was something powerful, something I had unknowingly carried with me for years, something buried deep within me. A legacy. The shadows wavered, almost as if they were sensing my defiance. They recoiled, their writhing forms twisting away from the light that had begun to flicker deep within me. The hunger that had gnawed at my mind, that had dragged me into its depths, seemed to hesitate for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. "You cannot escape, Ted." The voice echoed again, its tone calm, almost bored. "We are the eternal hunger. You are already ours. No matter how much you resist, you will be consumed." The voice was still oppressive, but there was a tremor in it now. A crack in the facade of the thing that had taken root in this place. The hunger, which had once been all-consuming, now seemed fragile in the face of what was stirring inside me. And I understood, finally. I wasn't alone anymore. The darkness had grown stronger over the years. The bunker had been built on top of a gateway, an opening to something ancient. Presley and the others had fed it, unknowingly or not. They had become part of its endless cycle, drawn to this place where time blurred and the hunger never ceased. But I wasn't them. I wasn't a victim. I was the key. I hadn't realized it before. I had only thought of the siren, the mass, the shadows as forces beyond my control. But I was wrong. The very reason I had been drawn here was because of what I carried with me. A bloodline, twisted and darkened by the hunger that had taken root long ago. My ancestors had made a deal, a pact to open the door, to feed the thing that lurked beneath. But not me. I refused. The shadows retreated, pulling back as if threatened by the energy I was beginning to draw from within. They feared what they couldn't understand, what they couldn't consume. I reached inside myself, searching, feeling for the spark that had ignited. It was like a dormant fire, a furnace of power that had lain hidden for so long, and now, with the hunger rising around me, it surged to the surface. I could feel it humming, vibrating through my very cells, feeding the light that had begun to grow. The siren's wail continued, its shrill cry piercing the air, but now it wasn't just a call, it was a plea, a desperate, hungry plea from something that could sense its own defeat. I could feel it pulling at the edges of my consciousness, dragging me back into the dark places of my mind. But I wasn't going to let it. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms as I forced myself to focus. There had to be something I could do, some way to use what I had discovered, this strength inside me. The hunger was still there, gnawing at the edges of my awareness, but it was no longer the only thing I could feel. I didn't know what had been passed down through my bloodline, what pact had been made all those years ago, but it didn't matter. I had the power to break it. I raised my head, eyes burning with determination. No. It was a whisper at first, but as the words left my lips, I felt the shadows around me recoil, shuddering as if something inside them was dying. The hunger, that thing, was weakening, faltering in the face of something stronger than itself. The mass before me twisted violently, its tendrils lashing out, but they no longer had the same strength. The air was charged with an unnatural energy as I forced the spark within me to burn brighter, to push back the darkness. "You cannot defeat us." The voice spoke again, but it was weaker now, like the last gasps of an old, dying beast. I could hear the fear in it, the realization that it was losing its grip. I stepped forward, my body trembling with the effort, but I didn't stop. The light that had been growing inside me now radiated outward, pushing the darkness away in visible waves. The shadows writhed and recoiled, but they couldn't withstand the force of what I had become. This wasn't just resistance, this was defiance. The hunger screeched, its voice a terrible, unearthly sound that rang through the cavern, but it couldn't stop me. The light inside me surged, bursting outward like a flare, bright and blinding. It scorched the darkness, cutting through it like a blade, and then, in a single, earth-shattering moment, the world shifted. The darkness screamed. The mass collapsed inward, recoiling as though it were being drawn back into itself, back into the hole that had birthed it. The tendrils snapped, withered, and fell apart. The whispers, the voices of the trapped souls, faded away, as if the very act of resisting had severed the connection between them and the hunger. For the first time since I had entered the bunker, the air felt still. The siren's wail, too, had ceased. The sound that had echoed through the entire town, the sound that had driven us all to madness, was suddenly silent. I stood there, breathing heavily, the light still glowing around me, my chest rising and falling as I processed what had just happened. The thing that had once ruled this place, the force that had claimed so many lives, had been driven back. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. There was too much history here, too many years of hunger and bloodshed. This wasn't just a battle, it was a war, and the hunger wouldn't stay quiet for long. But for now, in the stillness that had followed, I had won. The silence was overwhelming. For a moment I stood there, frozen, my senses heightened to every tiny sound. My breath echoed in my ears, sharp and ragged, but the cavern, once alive with the oppressive hum of the mass and the relentless screech of the siren, was now eerily still. The light still flickered around me, a faint halo that barely illuminated the space. But it was enough. Enough to make me feel like I had just escaped a nightmare. The shadows, those slithering, writhing things, had retreated, shrinking back into the recesses of the cavern as though they had been forced to retreat by some unseen force. The hunger, the overwhelming void that had gnawed at my mind, was gone. At least I thought it was. But something deep within me, some instinct I couldn't quite name, told me that the battle wasn't over. No, far from it. The hunger hadn't been eradicated, it had only been temporarily driven back. As the air around me began to settle, I lowered my head, breathing deeply. My hands still trembled, a residual effect from the surge of energy that had come from within me. What had happened? I had felt power rising in me, power that had been dormant for so long, but it hadn't just come from within. It felt like something ancient, something tied to the very earth itself, had reached up and used me as a vessel. I staggered forward, my legs weak beneath me, as if the gravity of what had occurred had finally begun to set in. The cavern seemed to close in around me, the walls narrowing, pressing together. I reached out to steady myself against the cold stone, but my fingers grazed something unexpected. Something warm. I pulled my hand back sharply, eyes wide in disbelief. It wasn't just the stone. There was something beneath it, something alive. I took a step back, heart racing. The pulse that had thrummed within me now vibrated through the very ground beneath me. The warmth I had felt was radiating from deeper within the bunker. It was a heartbeat. My mind raced, the hunger, the siren, the mass. It had all been connected to something far older, far deeper than I had realized. Presley, the warden, had unlocked something buried beneath the earth long ago. What they had thought was a shelter was something else entirely. A prison, a tomb. But what was buried here? What had Presley truly unearthed? A terrible thought crept into my mind. The thing beneath the bunker wasn't just an entity of hunger, of darkness. It was something living, something sentient, something waiting. And I had only just begun to understand the full scope of what that meant. The warmth beneath my hand grew stronger, and with it, a hum filled the air, vibrating through the very stone walls. It wasn't a sound I could hear directly. It was more of a feeling that pulsed through me, resonating in the pit of my stomach. I turned away from the warmth, eyes scanning the cavern, looking for an escape, but the passageways seemed to close in on me. I was trapped in here, in the very heart of it. I had fought to survive, but what did that mean if I was still within the reach of this place? I needed answers. I needed to know what Presley had done, what he had uncovered. I needed to understand how to stop it once and for all. Slowly I moved forward, my footsteps tentative, unsure. The faint glow around me began to dim, as though it too was exhausted from the battle. I didn't want to stop. I couldn't. The gravity of what I had just felt, of the power I had unknowingly channeled, made it impossible for me to ignore the urgency gnawing at me. If this hunger, this entity, had been dormant for so long, it had to have a reason. Presley must have known something. He had been obsessed with keeping people in the bunker, with feeding the mass, with the siren. But why? I moved toward the far side of the cavern, where the walls were covered in old, faded markings. At first glance, they appeared to be simple graffiti, scratched into the stone with crude tools. But the closer I got, the more I realized that the symbols were not random. They were occult, symbols of power, of summoning, of control. There, in the far corner of the cavern, just beyond the reach of the weak light, was a large stone slab. It had been partially covered by rubble and debris, but even now there was something unsettling about it, something that made my heart skip a beat. I walked over to it, the stone cold beneath my hands, and carefully brushed away the debris. The symbols on the slab were more intricate than the others. They were etched deep into the stone, like a language I had never seen, but one that felt familiar, like something buried deep in my subconscious. A chill ran down my spine. This was no ordinary slab. This was a seal meant to keep something contained. I ran my fingers over the markings, and as I did, I felt a sudden tremor, a shift in the air, like the cavern was holding its breath. Then a whisper. "You shouldn't have come back, Ted." The voice was familiar, but twisted, distorted. Presley's voice. But it wasn't just his voice, it was the thing's voice. The one that had been feeding off the fear and terror of everyone who had ever stepped into this bunker. The warmth beneath my hand intensified, and I realized, too late, that the seal was reacting. The power that had been dormant for so long, the thing buried deep beneath the earth, was awakening. I pulled my hand back as the slab began to vibrate, the symbols shifting and changing, glowing faintly with an unearthly light. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my bones, until it felt like my body itself was resonating with the energy of the seal. And then a deep rumble filled the air, the sound of something ancient stirring, something awakening from a long, long slumber. I had released it, and now there was no turning back.